Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel, The Simple Quiet Life, where we make it our ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind our own business, and to work with our hands, according to 1 Thessalonians 4:11. All right, so today I want to share with you something from this little book. It's called The Good Old Days Remembers the Little Country Schoolhouse, and I will show you the artwork on the front there. So I acquired several of these books from a used book display, and I was actually given these free. So I was really happy when I was able to get a hold of them. I was really happy because I love just reading about the past and, how people lived in the past. Especially, I like the pioneer days, but most of the stories from the Good Old Days magazines and books are, I would say, the Depression era and before, maybe a little bit later. But they're all very old stories. Don't quote me on that on the time range there, because I'm not positive. But there is a lot of good artwork in here too, which I really love. It's got this picture from the part of the article I'm going to read you today. So the schoolhouse with all of the children saying the Pledge of Allegiance and the boy holding up the flag. And even though my time period would be later than this, I still remember these days when, we stood and we said the pledge. I don't really recall somebody specific holding the flag, but I think I kind of remember that at one school or another, someone held the flag like this while we said the pledge. And you've got the old-timey pencil sharpener there on the teacher's desk. Do you remember those where you used to turn the handle and sharpen the pencil? I remember those. Those were fun. And the apple and the bell. And there's the teacher in the background. I can't tell from what she's saying the pledge to. And then there's a picture of George Washington on the wall. And they've got just very patriotic. It was back when Americans were respected their country, which I really like. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article. This article is called The Little White Schoolhouse. Yesterday, I posted a poem by this woman named Lucille Howe, Howe. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. So if you want to go back and look at under my, go to my channel under shorts, I just read the poem, and I might have put music in the background. I can't remember. I think I did. I put some music in the background. And I just read her poem because I thought it was cute, because most of the time, we hear about the little red schoolhouse, but she was writing about her schoolhouse, which was the little white schoolhouse. And she has a picture in here in her article of a little white schoolhouse. She doesn't really explain whether or not that was her as the teacher or whether one of the children are her. But you could see the little schoolhouse there and all of the children, and don't they look so pretty with the little girls all in their dresses, the teacher in her long skirt, and the little boys just in their little overalls. So I always thought it was amazing how in the past, the people looked really nice. They cared about how they looked when they went out places, and even the poor children would try to, the poor families would try to look nice when they went out. And it's a lot different than our day when we just go out in our sweatpants or whatever, and we look kind of sloppy when we go out. So that's a part of history that I like, is just people kind of respecting themselves more and caring about, looking respectable when they went out. And isn't it more pleasant when you are around someone who cares about how they look, and you think more highly of them too, I think. But a small part of this article that I wanted to read was just about their drinking, like during the middle of the school day when the children got hot and thirsty, what they did. And I wish I knew the year in which she wrote this, but I'm trying to look and see if she gives any indication. She doesn't really give any indication about how long ago this was, but this is quite an old publication, so I imagine she's a much older woman. All right, so I'm going to start with just this part where it's talking about collapsible drinking cups. Okay, remember collapsible drinking cups? Oh, here we go. Here's a date right here. When I started school in 1906, so you can go back all the way to 1906. This is even before the Great Depression. When I started school in 1906, we all drank. Okay, first of all, let me go back. I'm sorry, this is so disjointed. Remember collapsible drinking cups. I am going to show you one of the collapsible drinking cups that she's referring to. Now, when I thought of a collapsible drinking cup, I was thinking of a plastic one, because in my day, growing up, we had cups like this, but they were plastic. So if you remember those, put it in the comments section, let me know. But I remember the plastic ones. These were made of aluminum. This was made of aluminum. I did some research on these cups, and it actually said that they were invented in 1897, and they were thought of as they were called pocket cups, like something you would put in your pocket. And it was invented by a man named John Lines, Lines, and they were also referred to as cyclist cup because they were created for specifically for bicyclists, because there were a lot of people, especially women, going here to and fro on their bicycles. And he just thought how clever of an idea it would be to create a little cup that could collapse into a very small round cup. And really, like if you look at these online, they were actually a lot smaller than the ones I remember that were plastic. So when somebody's holding one in their hand, they were actually very small. But the lid, you see how this has a lid? Many of the earliest ones had a print on the top, and it was a picture of a man and woman on a tandem bicycle, like riding through the countryside. So it was a cyclist. I think they call it, the cyclist cup. And then eventually they became just something that was used on camping trips, traveling on vacation, in schools for children. And so that leads me into the next part of the story. And I am going to interrupt myself as I read this because it's just so interesting. History is fascinating to me. I love American history. Remember collapsible drinking cups? When I started school in 1906, we all drank out of the same dipper from an open pail, if we were lucky enough to have water. All right, so what she's talking about here is these dippers, and I actually have one of these. Isn't this cool? I love this. Because I have this hanging normally in my kitchen right above my sink, and I will show you the inside of it. It's just made out of aluminum or something, and it has a wooden handle and a little hook on the top, a little loop to hang it from. You can tell that it is old and worn. I'm not sure who it was used by, and the bottom has a sticker on it. It says save $2. Sale $2. I don't know. I probably bought this at a garage sale or something many years ago, but it does show some signs of wear. There's some rust around it and everything. But this is what she's talking about. She says, when I started school in 1906, we all drank out of the same dipper from an open pail, if we were lucky enough to have water. There was no well on the school grounds, and two older pupils would carry a pail between them from the nearest farm, almost a quarter of a mile away. This was usually done at noon. There would be perhaps 20 thirsty children waiting for a drink after eating a dry lunch. By afternoon recess, one might well find the pail empty. Many cold or stormy days we had nothing to drink all day, unless we brought it from home, and few of us did that. Then a new law was passed requiring schools to provide a more sanitary way of dispensing water. So I'm going to interrupt myself here for a minute, because just imagine being in school and two of the older children, there's no running water in the school. So two of the older children are sent out to get a pail of water. And you've seen the old pictures where the two people are carrying a pail of water together. I think they even did this on Little House on the Prairie, and they would go to the creek and get some water, and it took two people to carry it because the water is really heavy. If you've ever just bought a pack of water bottles at the grocery store, you know how heavy water is. And so you can picture these two children, carrying the bucket together and, sloshing water out on the way. So there's only half the water by the time they get back, especially if they're carrying it, what'd you say, about a quarter of a mile away. Is that what she said here? I thought she said it was about a quarter of a mile away. Yeah, almost a quarter of a mile. And so by the time they get back, everybody has to drink out of this. So they basically, dipped it in the bucket and took a drink, dipped it in the bucket, took a drink, and they were all drinking out of the same thing. As a matter of fact, I have to tell a funny story. So many, many years ago, we were going to a church, and we had not been in that denomination of a church before, and we didn't know the way they did communion. So the pastor said he had everybody come to the front, and you lined up, and there were elders across the front holding the bread and the grape juice, and you just stood in line and you came up to them, and then they would say a prayer or a blessing. They would say something, and then you would take your communion. So I thought he said, he was explaining how to do this, because I was used to the little cups being passed around and just taking the cups and eating the little cracker and the grape juice. But that's not how they did it there. So he was explaining that they had the loaf of bread, and they had the it was cup, I forget what you call them, but the tall cups, where they would put the grape juice in. It was just one cup and a loaf of bread. So he explained how to do it, and I thought he said to sip it, just take the piece of bread and then eat the bread and sip it. But I was standing there in line and thinking, sip it? I don't really want to sip it, because I had all these people in front of me, and I knew all these people are going to be sipping out of the same cup. I didn't really want to do that. And I'm thinking, how can I get out of this, And then I was watching people, and I noticed that, I didn't actually notice at the time, but, I didn't really see, because you couldn't really see the people in front of you. But when I got up to the pastor, I started to he's holding the cup like this, and I started to take it from him, pull it over toward me, and he's he pulled it back, and he's no, he's dip it. And I was oh, okay, I thought you said to sip it. And it was kind of embarrassing. But so you're supposed to take the bread, they give you the bread, and then you dip it, and then you eat the bread. That's how they did it. But I thought he meant to sip it from the cup, and I was so relieved that I didn't have to sip it out of the same cup as everybody else. But anyway, in the olden days at school, that's how they did it. They dipped the water out of the pail, and they all sipped from the same. I need to take that sticker off. That just brings modernity into it, we want this to look old-fashioned, right? We don't want a big orange sticker on there. So I will take that off. All right, so let's go on and read. So she said that many times on cold and stormy days, they didn't even get a drink at all, because they couldn't go out on those type of days to get the water. And then she said a new law was passed requiring schools to provide a more sanitary way of dispensing water. We had a crock with a faucet on it, and each pupil had to provide his own cup. How interesting. Isn't that interesting? So in 1906, this law was passed. They had to provide their own cup. Tin cups, cracked cups, old cups, and new cups appeared. Now I want to show you something about the tin cups. I have an old tin cup, which I have wrapped some jute around, And this is, you can tell, this seems even older than my little dipper there. It does have rust inside, and it is, just put it on my hand so you can see about the size of it. It's about the size of maybe a coffee mug, only shorter, maybe one of those shorter coffee mugs. Like, well, I was going to say maybe one of those camping coffee mugs, but it's a little bit shorter than that, and depends on what size you buy, I guess. But anyway, this reminds me of the little tin cup that Laura and Mary got on Little House on the Prairie. Do you remember that episode where Mr. Edwards was Santa Claus, and he came like all the way across the creek and he brought them gifts? It might have been the first Christmas episode, and they were so excited because he brought them each a little tin cup, and they didn't have their own cup at the time. So I always wondered why Carrie didn't get a cup. Why didn't she get a cup? I don't know, maybe she had a bottle. But this is what she's talking about in the article, that some of the children brought tin cups, cracked cups, old cups, and new cups appeared. Then, one day, one lucky kid came with a collapsible aluminum cup. How we envied that youngster. After a year or so of begging, hinting, and hoping, most of us had those wonderful cups, which were no more sanitary than the old ones, but took up less space in our desks. I thought that was so cute. I just thought that was such a neat story to, think about how the one child brought the tin cup, and it was collapsible. They could put it in their desk, and everybody else wanted one. And finally, they all had one. The typical keeping up with the Joneses, right? Even children did that back then. But how neat that they all, had to switch from drinking out of this. Can you imagine everybody drinking out of this during COVID? It puts things in perspective. But still, I guess I just want to say there's something sweet about, I guess, hearing how they did things in the past. Not that we would want to do everything, but it's neat to see how they shared. That was a form of sharing. They learned how to share. They did with what they had. They didn't have cups. They didn't have the ability. They didn't have a drinking fountain. They didn't have running water in their school. So they made do with what they had. And I imagine that even today, if we didn't have running water, and if we didn't all have our own cups or multiple cups in a family, more than we need. We all have, like, in our families, if you think about it, we've gone from not having cups in the classroom where they had to drink out of this, to having so many luxuries where, we have multiple cups per person now, which we don't need either. And so I think there's got to be kind of a sweet place in the middle where we can have what we need, but not have more than what we need. Only have what we need. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll try to make some more videos on some of these old ways that people had in the past. And I also pulled out this part of this article. I think talked about like a lunch pail, and that's why I grabbed this little pail here. This is small. This is not like the size of the lunch pail that they would have had back then, because let me show you the dipper. There's the dipper, there's the pail. You could not fit your sandwich in this pail, and there's the cup, and there's the pail. So this is a miniature version. It's not like miniature, but it is a small version of what the children might have used back then when their mom would, take maybe a cloth and wrap their sandwich up. She would make a sandwich or some leftover fried chicken from the night before, or just other things that she had in the house, some bread. And what did they used to say? They would take an apple, they would take bread, and then I forget what else they would take sometimes with them that were easy convenience type of foods to take with them. Wish I could remember offhand. But anyway, the mother would put their food in their lunch in the pail, and they would take that to school with them. And it's just kind of neat to see how things have changed over the years, and to look at You know, what still works. One thing I like about the Amish is that they they move along with the times in some ways, but in some ways they don't. And I read not long ago that they tend to keep around what works. So if, you know, something worked in the past and it was good enough for people in the past and it worked well for them, then why move forward with new technology and new things that just distract us from life, the important things in life, and cause us to spend more money on things that we don't need? And you know, really the honest truth is a pail like this would probably work fine for our lunches. If we were going on a picnic, we could stick something in here, and we could put, even we have ice packs, we could put ice packs. Now, of course, this one's too small, but similar things that we have around the house that we already have, or just baskets we have, you know, like we can go to Goodwill, and there are so many baskets at Goodwill. Really pretty baskets for about $1.99. Instead of going to pay $25, $30 for a modern lunchbox that we could get at Walmart. But why not go to Goodwill and just get an old-fashioned basket? And when we go on a picnic, put some things in the basket with some ice cubes. I've even done this going to work, is taking like a Ziploc bag and doubling it and then putting ice in it and sticking it in whatever container I have just to keep it cold. So we could do that on a picnic, because if you think about it, when you go on a picnic, you usually go and eat not long after that. So you're not going to have a lot of time where the ice is going to melt or something like that, unless it's a really super hot day. But just using, you know, some resources that we have around our house, and using things from the past that still work. And why not keep them around? Why go spend money and buy things that we don't really need? And that's not, I read in one of these books, and I might share this later, that Americans used to be really frugal before Americans got, you know, so greedy and started spending money on everything. They were actually very like frugal people. And I will probably make another video on that, because I have some other books that I want to share that I think some of my viewers would really appreciate and love. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it got to be a little bit long, but I hope you enjoyed it, and have a great day. Bye.